Why, hello there. I didn't hear you come in. Sit down. Let's talk. The Oxford English Dictionary defines the word sensitive as follows. Sensitive, adjective. 1. Quick to detect or respond to slight changes, signals, or influences. 2. Of a person or a person's behavior having or displayed a quick and delicate appreciation of others' feelings. Easily offended or upset. I suppose I shouldn't be so sensitive. Kept secret or with restrictions on disclosure to avoid endangering security. Right-wing Twitter, on the other hand, holds to a different definition, which I can summarize roughly as follows. Sensitive. The state of being a leftist cuck bitch. The type of person who is prone to posting L's, ratioed, cope, and C. Now there's a little bit of overlap between these two definitions. If you look at the dictionary definition, it does say under point 2 that a person who is sensitive can be easily offended or upset, which is all the right-wing definition refers to. But is that really all it means? Well, not according to the Oxford Dictionary and not according to me either, which is why I'm sitting here, sipping wine in my cyclorama wall, about to do something that, as with most of my content, may really get me in trouble. I am going to defend the importance of sensitivity and feelings. Again. I know. I can hear the tweets, I can hear the zeets. Woman moment. Lauren is a lib. Be gone, thought. And you know what? That's okay. Because those comments also come from feelings. And even if the way that they're written is, well, counterproductive to say the least, that doesn't change the fact that those feelings exist. These people's feelings make them engage with my content, because to them, their feelings matter. And really, that is politics in a nutshell. A battle of feelings. Seriously, why else would any of us put ourselves through this hell that is modern politics? Think about it, really. Politics is a constant struggle with our fellow citizen, both online and in real life, which can lose us friends and stop us making new ones. It is an emotionally draining, psychologically damaging war of all against all, which only stops short of being a full-on war.
I'm in a glass case of emotion!
Because politics is itself supposed to be a substitute for violence.
Hvor ist die Kontinuation of politics by Otamins?
Political engagement of any kind, on any issue, is inherently designed to help one group or cause or community, and almost always at the expense of someone else who wants to lay claim to the same resources. Why would any of us want to get involved in that sort of perpetual knife fight unless we cared deeply about what we were fighting for?
Well, that's what we do. We fight.
Unless we cared so deeply about our cause, even if that cause is just our own pocketbooks, that we were willing to risk these slings and arrows of increasingly outrageous discourse. And yet, despite the fact that politics is basically driven by emotion, you hear a lot of conservatives either denouncing emotion itself,
What a load of shit.
or simply denouncing being aware of it at all. This can take several forms. You all know I've made no secret of my disagreement with Ben Shapiro's famous quote,
"Facts don't care about your feelings."
but that's not the only way that this devaluation of emotion on the right takes place. For example, I recently got into a Twitter argument with Matt Walsh over the value of therapy.
Now, to be clear, therapy is overrated, overused, and not nearly as effective as people seem to assume.
I don't want to rehash this too much, but basically Matt's argument boiled down to therapy doesn't really help anyone. It makes them more liberal and essentially encourages them to ruminate on their bad feelings rather than going out and doing something to make their lives better. My argument, on the other hand, was that therapy not only can help people, but is increasingly essential in our increasingly distressing world. I think its liberal bent stems from the corruption of psychology rather than from psychology itself. And I believe that refusing to acknowledge or work through bad feelings will only make them worse, the same way that an untreated wound can fester.
'Tis but a scratch.
Now, to be clear, I have no problem with Matt. I brushed off the exchange as a good faith disagreement. I feel the same way about my disagreements with Shapiro. But recently, I've started to wonder if their mindset isn't indicative of a larger problem on the right, one that I've observed a few times. Recently, after tweeting about how I've become more sensitive to the media I consume. For instance, I am more affected by content with too much sex and violence these days, which some people somehow took as evidence that I was going soft.
You're a big fat pussy.
And I understand these are just a few small accounts responding, but I have seen similar responses all over right-wing Twitter to various takes of this genre. Especially, responses to my calls for understanding toward young people's economic struggles, or just my defense of people struggling with trauma. Whew! Are you guys okay?
Nah, man. I'm pretty f***ing far from okay.
And more importantly, what happened? How did the right, a political movement which claims to be about understanding people in society as they are rather than as we'd wish them to be, just suddenly decide to write off the dominant form of human experience and pursue this crude rationalism? What happened to make us decide as a movement that we need a total and complete shutdown of our hearts until we can figure out what the hell is going on?
A total eclipse of the heart.
How did we misunderstand human beings and ourselves that badly? Well, today, we're gonna find that out. We're gonna find out where these problems came from, and more importantly, how to fix our view of the world before we end up alienating the vast majority of the population. Because gatekeep enough, and soon the outcasts outnumber you. So, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to conservative sensitivity training. Why are we like this? Honestly, before I can even get into that, or suggesting ways to change and why, I would like to take a brief walk down memory lane in order to answer one question. Has conservatism, the right, always been just a cold, rational ideology concerned more with minds than with hearts? No. In fact, if you told many of the foundational conservative thinkers in the English-speaking world that this is what their ideology had become, they would be horrified. You see, in the West, conservatism, along with the terms right and left, starts with the French Revolution. Before the Revolution, in the French Assembly, defenders of the monarchy and the church historically sat on the right side of the room, while opponents of the monarchy and church sat on the left side of the room. Yes, hundreds of years later, we're still basically using terms from an 18th century seating chart to describe our politics. But then, the revolution happened. And, well, let's just say there weren't any defenders of the monarchy in the assembly anymore.
Chop, 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 chop.
Nevertheless, in the UK, something fateful was about to occur, specifically after the fall of the Bastille. The French aristocrat Charles Jean-Francois Dupont sent a letter to his buddy, the Irish Member of Parliament Edmund Burke, basically asking, "Hey bro, so this revolution thing's pretty wacky, pretty crazy, huh? What do you think?" Now, because Burke was a member of the Whig Party, which was considered the Liberal Party at the time, Dupont probably expected Burke to say he was cool with the revolution. But instead, Burke responded with two letters, the second of which was effectively a late 18th century version of a schizo Twitter thread about all the reasons the French Revolution was evil libtard cringe and how dare they hurt my waifu Marie Antoinette. That second letter was later published as a pamphlet called Reflections on the Revolution in France, and to this day is widely considered the foundational text of conservatism in the English-speaking world. Which raises an important question. Who was Edmund Burke exactly? Was he a facts don't care about your feelings style commentator who thought the French Revolution was bad because it would bring down France's GDP and, well, actually, the monarchy only beheaded people who had been convicted of treason according to the Ministry of Justice statistics? Lol, checkmate libtards? No. First of all, Burke would have been the last person to use GDP statistics, or any statistics for that matter, to defend the things he cared about. One of his most acidic quotes in Reflections on the Revolution in France goes like this: "The age of chivalry is gone. That of sophisters, economists, and calculators has succeeded, and the glory of Europe is extinguished forever." If you don't know what a sophister is, it's a reference to the Sophists, which were a group of philosophers in ancient Greece whose job was to teach young men how to argue. So in other words, if Burke had written this in the age of Twitter, it probably would have read something like, instead of knights, we have autistic, number-crunching debate bros ruling Europe. #clown world. Which gets to another point. Despite his membership in Parliament, Burke's main interest as a philosopher before then wasn't even politics. In fact, his first book started with religion and mocking pure rationalism. After that, Burke moved on to writing about aesthetics, or the study of what is beautiful, in his book, An Enquiry into the Origin of Our Ideas of the Sublime and Beautiful. As its title suggests, this book had nothing to do with politics and instead was an attempt to argue that beauty and sublime were rational and moral ideas rather than just subjective matters of taste. This was a man motivated by just about everything but data points and facts. Most horrifically, for the modern red pillars, he loved women too.
No, God!
I wasn't kidding before. He totally simped for Marie Antoinette.
No, God, please, no! No!
Remember that sophisters, economists, and calculators quote? Yeah, this is what he wrote before that about Marie Antoinette's execution. It is now 16 or 17 years since I saw the Queen of France, then the Dauphiness at Versailles, and surely never lighted on this orb which she hardly seemed to touch, a more delightful vision. I saw her just above the horizon, decorating and cheering the elevated sphere she had just begun to move in, glittering like the morning star, full of life and splendor and joy. What a revolution, what a heart I must have to contemplate without emotion that elevation and that fall. Little did I dream, when she added titles of veneration to those of enthusiastic, distant, respectful love, that she should ever be obliged to carry the sharp antidote against disgrace concealed in that bosom. Little did I dream that I should have lived to see such disasters fallen upon her in a nation of gallant men, in a nation of men of honor and of cavaliers. I thought 10,000 swords must have leaped from their scabbards to avenge even a look that threatened her with an insult. Woof! Burke would have been a menace in the DMs if we had Instagram in the 1700s. And, this sort of passion, not motivated by pure data, isn't just an 18th century British thing either. Flash forward to 1963 when Barry Goldwater, the first openly conservative candidate for president of the United States, wrote this in his book, Conscience of a Conservative. We liberals, they say, are interested in people. Our concern is with human beings, while you conservatives are preoccupied with the preservation of economic privilege and status. Take them a step further, and the liberals will turn the accusations into a class argument. It is the little people that concern us, not the malefactors of great wealth. Such statements from friend and foe alike do great injustice to the conservative point of view. Conservatism is not an economic theory, though it has economic implications. The shoe is precisely on the other foot. It is socialism that subordinates all other considerations to man's material well-being. It is conservatism that puts material things in their proper place, that has a structured view of the human being and of human society, in which economics plays only a subsidiary role. Now let me make this clear. Before Goldwater, both Republicans and Democrats generally considered themselves liberals. And yet, like Burke, Goldwater, one of the founders of American conservatism, is out here defending placing our humanity and our society over the economy or material things. Now, I can already hear the accusations that these people, particularly Burke, must have been cucks. So let me head those off now. First of all, whatever you think of his obsession with Marie Antoinette, Edmund Burke was defending monarchy and theocracy, both of which France was before the Revolution, against what he saw as basically 18th century Antifa. Barry Goldwater wanted to repeal the New Deal and even voted against the Civil Rights Act. That's racist! Not because he was racist, but he thought certain portions of it were unconstitutional. These guys were incredibly right-wing. And the reason they were so right-wing, as we see with Burke himself, is because of their sensitivity, not in spite of it. Not one of these people wanted to defend civilization just because it was wealthier, or because it had lower crime rates, or even because they enjoyed the tears of their enemies. They defended civilization because it was beautiful, because they loved it, and I would argue it was only because they were so sensitive to beauty and to the sublime, as Burke put it, that they were able to love so deeply in the first place. So what happened? How did we get to this point where we dismiss and mock sensitivity to even pure and noble emotions? Why do we sound like the very pure rationalists who Burke himself satirized? Well, to make a very long story short, because the left, especially recently, has weaponized sensitivity as a way to censor, shut down, deplatform, and sometimes even divide the right. I'm triggered. At the same time that men have trended more conservative and women have trended more liberal. I likely don't need to remind many of you watching that this started with almost imperialist-like behavior from radical feminist activists who acted like entryists into various communities and then tried to push everyone out who didn't agree with them. I don't have time to explain #Gamergate, but let's just say that's Exhibit A. And they didn't stop with the gamers. Woke activists have used their claims of sensitivity to go after everything from video games to even knitting, which is probably why so many people hear any discussion of sensitivity from a woman, even one like me, and think it's the first sign of an invasion by shrill and fragile feminist mean girls. So, if you're one of those people and you're just itching to type woman moment in the comments because you worry that I'm gonna treat you like a progressive feminist, then believe me, I understand your fear. But I would also say,
Trying to help you.
now, one fair question that a lot of people may have after hearing that whole intro is, Lauren, you started this video talking about the dictionary definition of sensitivity, and yet you haven't really told us what kind of sensitivity you want to promote, or really what you even think sensitivity is. And you know what? That's fair. I haven't really defined which aspect of sensitivity I'm talking about because, yeah, it can mean multiple things. And even if we were to reduce it down to being just emotionally sensitive, that too can mean multiple things. For example, am I saying that we should take things more personally?
It became personal with me.
Or am I saying that we should care more about how other people feel?
You don't care about how I feel!
Well, considering I don't think the right, or anyone in politics for that matter, really needs any help taking things more personally,
I took offense to that.
no. What I'm saying is that we should care, really care, how other people feel. Well, that's obvious, Lauren. We learned that in elementary school. Yeah, people told us that in elementary school, but how many of us actually listened? Were we actually taught to care, or to just act out the motions of caring? And is perhaps much of our modern civilization the result of this disaster? So let me say it again. You should really deeply care, even about the people you hate, even about the people you think are destroying your country, even about the libtards and the communists and the feminists. And I even want you to care about their stupid snowflake tears, because unless you can understand where their tears come from, I guarantee you cannot stop them from being used against you. I know, again, hold the woman moment comments, because believe me, we'll get to them. Let me back up. When I say we should deeply care about people's feelings, there are a couple of things I don't mean. So let's start there, because there has been a lot of confusion about what sensitivity means, and quite honestly, it is mostly the left's fault. Mostly. So let's start with a really obvious point, and one that both right and left seem to have realized. Sensitivity does not mean performative empathy. Just because you make a lot of noise about how much you care about something doesn't mean you actually do. And if your only solution to any given problem that you supposedly empathize with is give me more power, or please continue to enable my behavior which is causing this problem in the first place, then what you're showing isn't empathy, it's a personality disorder. But performative empathy is an easy target, because the mere fact that we call it performative shows that we all know it has nothing to do with empathy or sensitivity or anything else. If it's performative, it's insincere, case closed. But not everyone who gives sensitivity a bad name is insincere. In fact, I would argue the people who really give it a bad name, particularly in the right's opinion, are precisely the kind of people who are too sincere. I'm talking about the kinds of people who break down in tears when they hear a Dave Chappelle joke.
That's how trans people make me feel.
Because it's hate speech or whatever. Or the people who really do need to retreat to safe spaces with crayons and counselors. Once again, I'm not talking about the performative people. I think this is a common misconception on the right. They lump all these people in together, when if you actually closely analyze a lot of this content, you'll notice a good portion of these triggered SJW videos are almost the opposite of performative. If anything, they're begging the person holding the camera to stop filming because their expression of emotion is meant to be private. They're so overwhelmed that they can't even get a grasp of themselves in public.
Hey, SJW!
Give me your phone. You can't film people without their consent.
And I think it's hard for people who aren't so emotionally fragile to accept that someone like that can even exist and that it's not an act. But I'll tell you right now, they are real. So let's talk about them. The detransitioner Helena Kirshner actually explained this very well when talking about one of the main traits that makes people most susceptible to becoming a transgender, which was in fact extreme emotional sensitivity. But despite how this trait almost ruined her life, she was still able to clock the real problem. She says, experiencing emotions strongly is not a mental illness. It is a powerful yet natural human trait that when combined with an ill-fitting environment, lack of guidance, or even in some cases true dysfunctional family dynamics or trauma, can result in intense emotional pain, especially during the chaotic and hormonally turbulent period of adolescence. The problem, in other words, is not sensitivity. The problem is when sensitivity becomes fragility, which to me is another way of saying that sensitivity only becomes a problem when it's misapplied. And here I have to go back, really far back, to the Greek philosopher Aristotle. In Book 2 of his treatise of Nicomachean Ethics, Aristotle observes, "It is possible to fail in many ways, for evil belongs to the class of the unlimited and good to that of the limited, while to succeed is possible only in one way. For these reasons, also, then excess and defect are characteristic of vice, and the mean of virtue, for men are good in but one way, but bad in many." This quote comes from Aristotle's attempt to defend what moral philosophers today call the golden mean idea of virtue. The idea behind the golden mean is that rather than vice being the absence of virtue, it can also exist when you have too much of that virtue. Take courage. We all know that a soldier who cowers in a hole before the battle even starts is a bad soldier, a coward. But what about the opposite? What about a soldier who is so brave that they rush into battle without even thinking and make the situation worse for their comrades? It's bad too, which means that courage, real courage, actually lies somewhere between those two extremes. Being brave, yes, but doing it for the right reasons and at the right time. Otherwise, bravery just becomes stupidity. Makes sense, right? So let's apply this logic to sensitivity. We know what one extreme is. Sensitivity is so extreme that it prevents you from being rational, i.e. fragility. But what about the other extreme? What about when you are so utterly insensitive that you actually laugh at people's suffering or dismiss it out of hand, regardless of its validity? Well, the word for that is obvious: cruelty. Now, does that mean I think everyone who says facts don't care about your feelings is a cruel person? No, of course not. But they can come off that way, and ironically, I think that for most of them, that's not because of evil sadism at work. If anything, I speak from experience. I think a lot of people who fall into that F your feelings mindset are trying to follow Aristotle's ideals and have probably just taken it too far. We are so desperately trying to recreate a balance in the world between emotion and reason without realizing that we've all just broken the scales and effed it, because we can't undo someone else's excess by creating a new excess in ourselves. We only have control over our own internal scale. But the fact that we feel like we need to balance the scales at all is why I say the misunderstanding of sensitivity is mostly progressives' fault, at least in modern times. Because look at what cancel culture, which is weaponized faux sensitivity applied on a grand scale, look at what it has wrought. A world where we're told that SJWs always lie, that you should never apologize because it will make them smell blood, where actual apologies are almost always dismissed and mocked by Twitterannons with names like Stalin for time, Kim Jong unimpressed for being insufficiently contrite, or not accepting enough of the leftist party line, or just not groveling enough. In other words, progressives have given everyone, not just the right, an incentive to never be vulnerable and to always be cruel. This has gotten so bad that leftist activist Brianna Wu, one of the central figures in the anti-Gamergate movement, has even complained about it. I don't think I'm the only progressive with a ton of resentment built up over a decade at the fringe online left. It's such a cancerous set of tactics, waves of anonymous accounts acting like cops, morally loaded language out of proportion to any issue at hand, taking statements out of context and twisting them in dishonest ways for a dunk, an inability to provide credible sources for extraordinary claims, a total disdain for nuance, and always, always, always a ravenous appetite to hurt people on her own side, and the reputation of progressives has been destroyed accordingly. We're deeply unpopular in the party, we're seen as harassing assholes online, the way we used to critique gamers for behaving, by the way. The culture on Twitch and YouTube is constantly documenting the hypocrisy and insanity, and it's well-deserved. You know what a mindset like this does when it's applied to the whole culture? It tells people that vulnerability of any kind is just a weakness someone will use to hurt them. It tells them that caring about other people's feelings is a way to get suckered into moral blackmail from the other side. It tells them to clam up, to laugh at anyone who's not them, to own the enemy no matter what. And it tells them that empathy is a losing game, because it's either insincere performative crap or hysterical fragile fanaticism. And yes, that is mostly progressives' fault. Not because they're the only ones who do it, the more trollish parts of the right really seem to like the same approach, but because they have held almost monolithic cultural power for the past 10 years, and this is the kind of culture they've chosen to create. But that doesn't mean that virtuous sensitivity doesn't exist. It clearly does. And you know how I know that? Because Jordan Peterson exists. And actually, now that I mention it, I kind of wonder, how does Jordan Peterson keep getting away with this?
You have no idea how many people that's killing. If you're in pain, love and truth, that's what you got. So I wouldn't change that. But it's not nothing.
Seriously, that's not a gotcha. Why is everyone on the right okay with it? I mean, we're supposed to be obsessed with facts, not caring about your feelings, right? Yet Jordan Peterson turns on the waterworks and everyone on our side is like,
it's okay to cry.
What is going on? Well, I think I have an answer. And that answer comes from someone who, especially today's facts don't care about your feelings type of right-wingers, would appreciate. Friedrich Nietzsche. I quote from Part 2, Chapter 13 of his book, Thus Spake Zarathustra. When power becomes gracious and descends into the visible, such descent I call beauty. And there is nobody from whom I want beauty as much as from you who are powerful. Let your kindness be your final self-conquest. Of all evil I deem you capable. Therefore I want the good from you. Verily, I have often laughed at the weaklings who thought themselves good because they had no claws. Got that? Even Nietzsche, who a lot of the internet thinks of as a sort of dark prince of nihilism, wasn't anti-kindness. In fact, he thought kindness was the ultimate goal we should be all striving towards. What he was against was people who tried to pretend they were nice when the reality is they just didn't have any courage to be anything else. People who thought themselves good because they had no claws. And this is why Jordan Peterson, who is himself a Nietzsche enjoyer, gets away with crying. Because everyone can tell he has claws. He can fight and defend himself, which makes it safe for him to cry because he's choosing to be vulnerable even though he could actually mess someone up if he had to. So really, the point of being strong is precisely that once you're strong, then you can be kind and sensitive without compromising your safety. Which means that if everyone who claims to adhere to Nietzsche's philosophy really has made themselves into the ubermensch they want to be, then the next step should be to embrace their soft side. Because this will show that far from being weak, they are so powerful that they even have power over themselves. Which I think is what they would do if they really were powerful. But that is a big if, because even though Nietzsche clearly thought that being powerful requires you to be capable of evil, a lot of people misread that to mean that being powerful is the same as being an asshole. Let's be clear, this is complete nonsense. Don't take my word for it. Take the word of a philosopher whose name has literally become a byword for political ruthlessness, Niccolo Machiavelli. Machiavelli is famous for his quote that it is better to be feared than loved. But there's a big qualifier to that, which everyone seems to forget. Still, a prince should make himself feared in such a way that if he does not gain love, he at any rate avoids hatred. In other words, if you want to look at things from a cold sociopathic and, well, Machiavellian perspective, then if you want to be powerful, acting like an asshole all the time is a terrible idea. Because even if it does make people fear you, it also makes them hate you. And the hate cancels the fear out. And hey, you know something that really makes people hate you? telling them their feelings are stupid and don't matter, and you enjoy triggering their trauma for shits and giggles. Really makes you think. In short, if you want political power, this whole facts don't care about your feelings thing is really not going to work out long term. But maybe you're saying, Lauren, this all sounds nice in theory, but what are you even complaining about right now? You say the right is really bad at all this. Okay, why? Give us some solid examples. Show us. Well, folks, buckle up, because we need to talk about this video.
Why is it that I have to work 40 hours a week just so I can have a place to live? 40 hours a week makes me $2,000 a month, and my rent is $1,660. I'm just so tired.
That's right. It's time for me to white knight for my lady. Oh, how the turntables. Now, I don't have time to show that whole video, but you know what the girl never does once in it? She never asks for government help. She never calls for any kind of redistribution of wealth. All she does is talk about how hard her life is. And this is the key point. She's saying this in a country governed by the left. Now, I have to give credit where it's due. A lot of people on the right, other than me, responded pretty well. But you also had tweets like this. Okay, well, first of all, I really hope that come 2040, if people are in fact living in the pod and eating the bugs, the people in my generation aren't tweeting things like, "Oh, poor baby, you had to eat cockroaches and sleep in a coffin. I had to sell my nudes on OnlyFans to make rent. Get over it. You have to work to live, libtard." In other words, I hope that instead of trying to make sure everyone's as miserable then as we are now, we actually try to fix it. But secondly, you know what's interesting about those tweets? A lot of them are actually coded pleas for empathy for how hard things were in the past. Like this one.
My old man, God rest his soul, was raised dirt poor in the Bronx. He started working at age 10 to help his mom, beat polio, and went to City College in New York at age 15. Worked 7 days a week when I was growing up so we have a better life. Today's kids have no idea about real struggle.
That's actually a really sad, poignant message. It's as if the guy who wrote it is saying, hey, where's the sensitivity to what my dad went through? Where was his empathy? And really, all I can say is that if I'd been alive then, I would have been trying to make sure this guy's dad didn't have to be a child laborer. But you know what else I can say? I'm pretty sure his dad would not have wanted that life for him either. I'm pretty sure he worked as hard as he did so that his kids wouldn't have to live like that. Because his dad, while he was obviously a strong person, was also sensitive to how his kids would feel after what he had went through himself. And ironically, you know who else was sensitive enough to understand the pain in these tweets? The girl in that original video. Look.
All of these people have been raised or conditioned to believe that this isn't normal, that they should be working 70 hours a week, and that's awful. I am so sorry to all of you who are working harder than I am and still not making it. And I am so sorry that the way that you need to cope with that is to be mean to other people. If that's what you gotta do to get through life, you do you.
Okay. I am done simping for the Gen Z girl, I swear. She was just an example, so let's pick another one. Riddle me this, my right-wing viewers. What is the difference between her video and the many others like it that have gotten mocked by the right and this?
I've been selling my soul, working all day, overtime hours for bullshit pay, so I can sit out here and waste my life away, drag back home and drown my troubles away.
Seriously, how is the message any different? It isn't. But you know what was different? The reaction. Because as much as I beat up on the right for its response to all of these overworked, sad, overwhelmed Gen Z kids, the progressive reaction to Oliver Anthony was, oh boy. Yeah. The left did not take that well, whereas the right, we literally opened the first GOP primary debate by playing Oliver Anthony's song. Clearly, where he was concerned, we were capable of sensitivity. But let's focus on the left's initial reaction to the video and why it was so inexplicably dumb. Because for as long as I've been active in politics, conservatives have been telling people like Oliver Anthony, or even people like me, that the left are elitist urbanites who think of us as grubby racist deplorables who relish the idea of replacing us with immigrants and who secretly hope we die alone, broken, and maybe even addicted to opioids. And the left's response, when one of those people saying about how hard his life was to literally write entire think pieces about how racist and grubby he was. Like, if you're a conservative, don't lie, you probably found it hilarious how much the left literally played into the right's hands with that one. And why did they do that? Because when it came to people like Oliver Anthony, the left were being insensitive. Now let's flip that. The left tells young women that the right are misogynist pigs who want to take away their rights and subject them to eternal wage slavery for the crime of being born into the post-Great Recession economy. And then, when a young woman made a TikTok talking about how hard her life is economically under a Biden government, one of the right's largest online influencers responded to her with, "Shut up and make me a sandwich." Seriously, would the left have to say anything to make her vote for them at that point? We literally acted exactly like what they say we are and completely dismissed any of her problems. Which, speaking of confirming everything the left says, that gets us all the way back to Matt Walsh's take on therapy. The problem with his argument is that he's looked at the fact that the progressive version of therapy has made people more fragile and concluded that all therapy is bad. And leave aside for a second that this is not only not all therapy, but is explicitly bad therapy according to actual therapists, and ask yourself this: bad therapy or not? This is what progressives themselves want therapy to mean. An excuse to gaslight people into their rakes. And I get why they want it to mean that, but why would we agree with them? Why are we ceding this ground to them and letting them define what therapy is? Why are we letting people who may need therapy, or the many who have already benefited from it, have no way whatsoever to relate to right-wing ideology just because we accepted the left's twisted idea that all therapy is and should be leftist gaslighting? The same is true of our ideas about sensitivity. Progressives say that sensitivity is the same thing as fragility because that's a way for them to pretend that anyone who is sensitive enough to care about beauty or kindness or love must also be fragile, and therefore must be a progressive. Why are we letting them get away with it? Why are we letting them define all of these terms? Seriously, why? Is woke art just that beautiful and we can't compete? Of course not. We all know that woke art deliberately mangles beauty in order to promote equity, because those making this art are too fragile to handle the fact that creating real, enduring beauty takes work, self-criticism, and even failure. Are woke people really that kind toward the unfortunate? No. Their kindness is either performative covert narcissism, or is so laughably selective that they can only care about a person if their ideology says it's okay, or if that person is exactly like them. Because those who feel this kind of kindness are too fragile to handle showing it towards anyone whose experience might make them question their own life choices. Detransitioners. Do woke people really love more deeply and strongly and selflessly than anyone else? No. If anything, they demand unconditional love from everyone else while offering nothing in return, because they feel too broken and fragile to love themselves, let alone others. It is only by being sensitive that we can see these flaws. Only by truly loving beauty can we see that the woke are trying to reduce it to the status of a participation trophy. Only by truly being kind can we recognize that the woke are twisting kindness into emotional masturbation. Only by truly loving can we recognize that the attempt to make it politically compulsory is heartless. But, we don't say any of the things that I just said, because when progressives said that sensitivity was the same thing as fragility, we decided to just agree with them. I don't think we did this because we wanted to be sadistic. I think we did it because we thought it would scare leftists or progressives or something, because we wanted to feel powerful and scary and badass and reassure ourselves that our GigaChad profile pictures were more than just JPEGs behind which our simp souls cower naked and afraid. And for some of us, maybe because we were hurting ourselves and had no room in our hearts for anyone, let alone someone who looks like they voted for the people making our lives miserable. Maybe even because we wanted to punish them for what they voted for, just as the left wanted to punish Oliver Anthonys of the world for what they perceived them as voting for, and thought that acting like their worst nightmares would make their vengeance taste even sweeter. I don't think I'm making any of this up. Someone said something very similar in my mentions recently. I don't care anymore. I'm beyond giving a crap about the whining. Everyone whining supported every policy that led to this. If all of you were so smart and had the right ideas, how do you explain right now? If you did the right thing this whole time, how are you here? But this, my friends, a rejection of caring and being kind, it's not only politically stupid, it's morally dangerous. Again, don't take my word for it. Here's Nietzsche. Whoever fights monsters should see to it that in the process he does not become a monster. And when you look long into the abyss also looks into you. Conservatives, right-wingers, dissidents, whatever you call yourselves, because it is a wide umbrella, I implore you, progressives have already let their hatred of you make them monsters. Stop looking into the same abyss. Stop letting the slogans you use to fight the cruel behavior of your enemies become an excuse for your own cruel acts. Pursue power, yes, but also know that ultimately the end goal of power is to help people, which you cannot do if you refuse to listen to them and take them seriously when they talk about their pain. Even if you think it is stupid for them to cry about it on TikTok. Sorry, but the youth don't have community groups or large families they live near to cry about it too, like the good old days, because the oh-so-logical people told them to move away from home for cheaper property and more opportunity instead of whining. So now we just get the worst of both worlds. And anyway, the alternative to genuinely caring and being sensitive is what? Pretend we don't have any demons, no imperfections, nothing to be sensitive or insecure about? I sure hope not. Because to do that not only denies our own humanity, but it once more accepts the premise of a leftist idea. One of the oldest and most evil leftist ideas. That human beings can be perfected if only their souls are surrendered to a supposedly rational politics. And why is that idea so evil? Because it hides its hatred for and rejection of humanity as it actually is behind a false love for humanity as it could be. Yet its hatred has always been what defines its legacy. That one idea of perfecting humans midwifed the gulags, the Great Leap Forward, and the Holocaust. And by the way, how do we know that gulags, the Great Leap Forward, and Holocausts were evil? Is it because the gulags hurt Russia's GDP? Is it because the Great Leap Forward made the crime rate rise in China? Is it because the Holocaust raised the price of energy in Germany? No, it's because our sensitivity and our humanity tells us that the wholesale slaughter of innocents is an atrocity no matter the facts that we might use to rationalize it. Which brings me, finally, to all of those woman moment comments that I'm sure many of you have already left or are in the process of typing. Oh, Lauren only cares about sensitivity and feelings because she's a woman. Well, you know what? Yeah. Correct. I do care more about sensitivity because I'm a woman. More specifically, because I'm a mother. Yes, for all of you who have been wondering why I have gotten soft, there's your answer, because I'm a mom. Which ironically is why I feel like I'm one of the few people who can sort of understand both sides in this. Because before I became a mom, I was very into the whole edgy facts don't care about your feelings style signaling. But now that I am a mom, my emotions have gotten a lot more heightened. Because of the hard fact of biology. It's not even in my control. We are programmed to love our children so desperately and to feel that so deeply that it will literally keep us getting up in the morning every day and doing everything we can to take care of said children. And while it's wild having your brain chemistry change so much, I wouldn't trade these feelings for anything in the world, because my son is a far more beautiful reason to keep fighting for a world where he can grow up safe and happy and healthy than all of the bar graphs and the facts in the world. And yes, I understand. The bar graphs, the facts, many of them are correct and have their place in analyzing said world. But I also understand the emotional side because despite harsh protest from the right, I've embraced a bit more of my femininity. Which brings me to why I am specifically taking the time to call out the woman moment comments. because they are a great example of what I've been trying to point out about the right's attitude towards sensitivity all along. The fact that the right isn't just insensitive, but it isn't even strategic about their insensitivity. So think, just for a second, think with me here, you guys, okay? About what message it sends when you say woman moment, or you're hysterical, it must be your time of the month, any sort of response to a woman defending her cause on emotional grounds that just kind of discredits it. What do you think she hears when you say that? Well, I happen to be a woman, so I can tell you. What she hears is that in your mind, being emotional is bad, which means being feminine is bad, which means being a mother, which again biologically forces you to be more emotional, is bad. In other words, every time you say woman moment or any other variation of this sentiment in response to a woman's heightened emotional state, you're telling her to be more masculine, more confrontational, less nurturing. You, not feminists, you, are making her think that in order to be lovable, she has to be a girl boss. If a feminist tried to deliberately saw off the right into accepting their premises, they couldn't do a better job than this. And what about all of those struggling young people who the right continually say should just get smaller apartments or eat top ramen until they make it instead of whinging? Have you thought through what kind of obsessive cost cutting among young people would actually do if implemented at scale? If people totally gave up on any sort of expectation of a certain quality of life in the West, it would create a booming market for smaller apartments, and then for partial apartments, and then for pods. And eventually some enterprising company would introduce a brand of top ramen with bug meat in it, which is even cheaper than normal top ramen, and that would sell like crazy. So in other words, by following your advice, young people would literally live in the pod and eat the bugs in order to save money.
Totally sustainable bug burgers in 10 minutes. Start by grabbing some air-dried bugs on Amazon. These grasshoppers cost me just £12 and provide me with all the protein I need.
They might even never move out of their pods and rent everything because it's cheaper. They'd own nothing and they'd be happy. In other words, the World Economic Forum itself could not devise a more ingenious way of bringing their dystopian vision into reality than conservative boomers do on Twitter every day. Absolutely incredible. And I want to reiterate, I'm watching this firsthand. I'm watching my friends downsize to smaller and smaller apartments, paying higher and higher costs, apartments which have beds in their kitchens. And meanwhile, I'm observing every day these people, allegedly right-wing facts and logic individuals on Twitter, clearly detached from reality, not saying a word about this matter, instead ushering in this reality faster by calling these people libtards for having standards and not wanting to live in slums like a lot of the non-Western world do. And this counterproductive behavior is true of progressives too, obviously, because you know what all of their wildly insensitive talk of abolishing the police did? It didn't lead to some multicultural kumbaya. It created Kyle Rittenhouse. Because when there's no police to rely on, people turn to vigilante justice to keep their property and families safe, which means, among other things, they buy guns. The NRA itself couldn't have come up with a better strategy for making people want firearms than abolish the police. And all because, like the right, progressives couldn't even stop. They couldn't even think for a second, bring themselves to empathize with the people they were scaring with their ideas, enough to just consider how they'd react. Which I guess is my final practical argument against insensitivity. It literally makes you dumber. It makes you push ideas that play into your enemy's hands, which is why I don't trust anyone who doesn't have some basic level of sensitivity. Because even if those people have memorized every statistic on the planet, they've also shut themselves off from the most central part of human experience: emotion. And yes, it is the most central part. The social psychologist Jonathan Haidt describes the relationship between emotions and reason as like that between an elephant and a rider. That is to say, while the elephant is bigger and could basically do what it wants, the rider still has the capacity to guide it with the right techniques. But insensitivity makes that impossible, because insensitive people are so consumed with ignoring the elephant that they're just asking to be thrown off and trampled. Which is why an insensitive person is not a good ally to have, politically or otherwise. They're all head and no heart, all book smarts and no street smarts. And nothing translates worse to acquiring street smarts than thinking data points explain the human soul. Insensitive rationality, in other words, is useless both in dealing with politics and in dealing with reality. But while that may be the final practical argument against insensitivity, it's not the last one I'll make, because sensitivity, along with being good for your politics, it's also just good for your soul. And here I have to defer to the great Catholic apologist and poet G.K. Chesterton. In his book Heretics, Chesterton compares the difference between people who bore others versus people who get bored very easily. And he noted that it's the people who bore others that actually have higher qualities. They retain enthusiasm about subjects, happiness, and interest. They've got that spark for life still going. The bore is stronger and more joyous than we are. He is a demigod. Nay, he is a god. For it is the gods who do not tire of the iteration of things. To them, the nightfall is always new, and the last rose as red as the first. This applies to sensitivity as well. People quiet their sensitivity when they feel pain. They become distant, they become cruel, they even become lonely. I know I've picked on red pillars many a times, but this is one case where they're kind of accidentally correct when they talk about things like pair bonding issues. They look at it wrong, though, when they go like, oh, look, the chart says more sex equals less likely to marriage. Herder must be true. They're obviously reading cause and effect wrong. It's not the physical act of sex that's doing this. It's obviously the repeated mental trauma and trust issues that go along with many failed relationships. And people, out of their own choice and self-protection, shutting down their ability to love and losing interest or hope with each passing relationship. Much like the bored person who enjoys a sunset less and less each time it's viewed. As Chesterton said, it is the gods who do not tire of the iteration of things. Which means, if you are able to retain your sensitivity instead of sacrificing it on the altar of fear of abandonment, fear of embarrassment, fear of the past pain, or fear of your enemies using it against you, and instead you truly become strong rather than merely performatively strong, then you too can be the metaphorical demigod that Chesterton speaks of. You too can be forgiven and made strong and love like you were loving for the first time. Have a spark for life and joy and feel pain and engage with reality in a genuine way again. Not this faded, muted, false reality too many of us are occupying in which we do not feel the whole spectrum of human emotions anymore. The alternative is nothing but eternal cope, which is what slogans like facts don't care about your feelings truly are. Cope. In the case of facts don't care about your feelings, the implicit message is that even if someone does manage to gain political power through emotional manipulation, reality will slap them down without their opponents having to do anything. And maybe, as was the case with the Soviet Union eventually, reality will intrude. But it took the Soviet Union like 70 years and millions of deaths to fall. Would we really rather surrender to that sort of evil in the hope that it will eventually fly too close to the sun and be destroyed? Or would we not be better served trying to persuade our fellow citizens not to put their trust in progressive wings of wax at all? And yes, I know how hard that kind of persuasion can be, because progressives sell a very seductive vision. They tell their adherents that it is okay if you have no redeeming qualities and never try to gain any, that you matter and deserve everything just the way you are. And it works, because who among us doesn't want to be loved despite our imperfections, even though, of course, the logical outcome of pretending we're perfect despite them is that we will only enable those imperfections to grow. But it is precisely because that message is so seductive that our answer cannot be its equally poisonous inverse, that you deserve nothing and don't matter if you have any flaws or imperfections at all. That way lies eternal dissatisfaction, bitterness, alienation, and shame. That is not a message we would teach our own children. So why would we try to foist it upon our fellow citizens, and why would we let it crush our own souls? So I close with this plea. Look, I know our addiction to screens seems to turn our brains ever more implacably into unfeeling, autistic imitations of computers. There's a reason that autism diagnoses have skyrocketed in recent years thanks to the digitization of our experience and the obsession with facts over feelings is just one depressing symptom of that. But we must fight that trend. Both you and me. If anything, I'm having this whole conversation to convince myself of all this too, because I often just want to take the easy way out. And I fail. I fail all the time at trying to be kinder and more sensitive. I'm human as well. But I can't keep failing. I have to stop that. We have to stop. The only option is to feel. Truly feel your fellow citizens' pain. And even if you see that the things they blame for it are false, don't mock or dismiss the fact that that pain exists. Reach out the hand of friendship rather than the scolding upraised finger of superior knowledge. Many on the right have remarked upon the childlike behavior of modern progressives, and yet, as the mother to an actual child, I remain stunned that they have not put together the obvious conclusion from this. That if progressives truly are childlike, then to persuade them, we should look to the methods that actually persuade children. Every parent knows you don't convince a toddler to eat their vegetables by logically arguing them into it. The statistics supporting consumption of broccoli mean much less to a child than the loving reassurance of a mother and the warning of "here comes the airplane." And by the same token, if you're dealing with a bunch of people that have so much trauma or lack of stable upbringing that they can barely engage with life except to release the occasional sobbing TikTok, then in what universe would you think showing them data is going to convince them to change their ways? As Theodore Roosevelt, one of the great Republican presidents of the 20th century, put it, "No one cares how much you know until they know how much you care." And that's not even touching on another obvious benefit of sensitivity for the soul. The fact that it enables the creation of art. I see so many right-wingers on Twitter with profile pics drawn from great art of the classical or Christian past. And while I'm glad that they know art exists, I can't help but wonder why no one on the right seems to be trying to make more art like it. Or at least I would wonder if not for the fact that the right sneers endlessly at the very love and wonder and deep emotion that makes that kind of art possible. In fact, when the right attempts art, it seems to be more of an exercise in showing how much they hate the left and enjoy hurting them.
Lady Ballers.
I'm sorry, Nick. It was a very well done film, but I had to. And while that kind of thing has its place, the right isn't supposed to just be about destroying their enemies. They're not nihilists. The majority consider themselves conservatives. So why do so few conservatives try to show the world the beauty of the things they are trying to conserve? Why, instead of relishing their role as cackling villains in the left's fragile fantasies, have conservatives not tried to show the world that it is they, not progressives, who truly can be heroes? To see one's ideals take beautiful physical artistic form is the ultimate compliment that the heart can pay to the mind, and yet the right doesn't want to do it. But they must, we must, once again, if only because art will enable those who are sensitive to see our hearts for the cathedrals that they are, rather than the prisons progressives hallucinate. Unless, of course, progressives are correct, and the hearts of the right are prisons. Then I guess we'll just persist on this path, won't we? But take my word for it, as someone who still, despite being fairly label-averse, considers herself right-adjacent, a dissident, and yet is also a sensitive person, the world needs a reminder of what beauty truly means, far more than it needs yet another lecture on the cold, logical indifference of factual knowledge. So which way, Western man? Shall we open our hearts to the lost people crying out in the digital dark woods of error for the soothing purpose and power of tradition? Or shall we laugh at their pain from afar with pharisaical sneers and let our stony hearts be made into bricks with which the devil can pave the road to hell? Choose wisely. Our civilization depends on it.